My name is Evelyn, and I'm 30. Right there in a packed courtroom, my wealthy husband publicly accused me of being unable to have children. He claimed I had tricked him into a union where he could never become a father. His lawyer immediately began showing papers that allegedly confirmed my medical condition was a direct violation of our marriage agreement. Marcus, dressed in his expensive designer suit, played the part of the grief-stricken husband. He put on a show, acting as if his greatest dream of having children had been destroyed by me, his inadequate wife. The judge seemed to sympathize with him. The spectators in the courtroom watched the performance with interest. As for me, I calmly reached into my handbag, a slight smile playing on my lips. By the way, what city are you watching from? Leave the name in the comments. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe, especially if you know the feeling of being let down by someone close. Trust me, you'll want to see how this all ended. Let's rewind 4 years so you can understand how I managed to tie my life to such a first-class liar. Picture this, I'm working as a VIP client manager at one of the most luxurious hotels in Chicago. And then, one day, Marcus Blackwell bursts into my life, looking like he stepped right off the cover of a business magazine. He was dressed in an immaculate, tailor-made suit, with dark, perfectly styled hair and sharp brown eyes that seemed to scan right through you. He had such an aura of power that the air around him felt denser. He had arrived to personally oversee the organization of an urgent, confidential board meeting for his corporation. And, to my, as it seemed at the time, good fortune, I was the one assigned to ensure his team's stay was flawless. I need absolute control and zero publicity, he said at our first meeting, his voice quiet but demanding, leaving no room for error. Everything must go off without a single hitch. How fateful those words turned out to be, right? But in those days, I was looking at everything through rose-colored glasses. Marcus sent extravagant bouquets to my modest studio apartment every day for a whole week. He invited me to exclusive establishments where the staff greeted him by name, and the champagne we drank cost more than my monthly rent. And that evening, when he asked the big question in a private rooftop garden overlooking the glittering city, presenting a ring that could have bought a small island, I genuinely believed I had won the lottery of life. The wedding itself was a fairy tale event. Marcus spared no expense. I had a dress from a world-renowned designer, an elite agency handled the planning, and the guest list looked more like a who's who of the business world. His mother, Isabella, flew in from Texas, glittering with enough jewelry to fill an elite jewelry store display case. His business partner, David, gave a touching speech about friendship and future success, making all the guests raise their glasses in excitement. I felt like Cinderella, who had finally reached her happily ever after. Except fairy tales don't tell you what happens after midnight, when your perfect prince takes off his mask. No, that comparison is unfair. Your prince just turned out to be a wolf in sheep's clothing. Actually, even that isn't quite right. At least wolves are honest predators, they don't spend years pretending to be something they're not. The first hints of doubt should have appeared during our honeymoon in Hawaii. We were staying in a luxurious, secluded bungalow with a panoramic ocean view that stretched to the horizon, and I was absolutely glowing with happiness, as a newlywed should be. Marcus, I said one morning over breakfast on our private veranda, I was thinking, maybe when we get back, we could start trying for kids. His coffee cup froze in midair, not quite reaching his mouth. His reaction was as if I had suggested something utterly wild. That's a wonderful thought, darling, he said. But let's not rush. We need to enjoy each other first, our marriage. Sounded logical enough, didn't it? It turned out that, enjoying the marriage, actually meant Marcus would spend 16 hours a day at work. My role was reduced to decorating our luxurious penthouse and planning flawless dinner parties for his business partners. Every time I tried to bring up the topic of children, he had an excuse ready, as if he had memorized them. Either his company was expanding to a new level, or the economic situation was unstable. He promised we would go to London first, or Dubai, or to the ends of the earth. He was ready to offer anything just to change the subject immediately. But the trips themselves were always perfectly organized. In those moments, Marcus transformed back into the perfect husband. He wouldn't let go of my hand as we wandered through the halls of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, "Kiss me on the Golden Gate Bridge against the sunset." He posted romantic photos of us on his social media, accompanying them with touching captions about his beautiful wife. His followers were thrilled, leaving comments like, "This is true love," and constantly asking when our family would be expecting an addition. If only they could see what happened as soon as we were alone. If only they knew that behind closed doors, my husband treated me like an expensive accessory, beautiful, high status, but completely soulless. The moment we returned from any trip, Marcus would immediately disappear, taking with him the remnants of my hopes for a happy family life. His home office became his personal fortress. The fitness club became his second address, while our shared bedroom increasingly resembled a museum hall, impressive, but absolutely cold and lifeless. Whenever I tried to show any affection or intimacy, he would instantly remember an urgent email that required his immediate attention. Apparently, the stock market indices couldn't wait while his wife felt desired. I started making excuses for him, as if it had become my new unpaid job. Ambitious people always have busy schedules, I convinced myself. He's building a business empire, and that requires total dedication. However, late at night, as I stared at the ceiling above our enormous bed while he slept facing the wall, I couldn't shake the oppressive feeling that something in our life had gone completely wrong. And by something, I really meant absolutely everything. My friend Chloe, who worked at a prestigious private clinic and had known me since our student days, was the first to openly say what was obvious. "Evelyn, you look completely exhausted," she noted during one of our monthly lunches, carefully studying my face. "How long has it been since you and Marcus last had a real, heart-to-heart talk?" "We talk all the time," I tried to argue. But even I could hear how false it sounded. It was a bit like saying, "We live in the same house, so of course, everything is fine." About what? His work? Your social outings? When was the last time he asked what you really think about something that truly matters to you? I couldn't find an answer, because I simply couldn't remember such an instance. Marcus had perfected the art of maintaining the appearance of a dialogue without actually engaging in it, just like a politician, only with better hair and worse intentions. He might ask how my day was without ever looking up from the news feed on his phone. In public, he showered me with compliments, but as soon as we were alone, I might as well have been a piece of furniture. The breaking point came on our second anniversary. I had put in a massive effort to organize the perfect evening at home. I had arranged for a private chef to prepare a dinner that exactly replicated the menu from our first date. I had placed candles everywhere and found the exact brand of champagne we drank at our wedding. I just desperately wanted to feel that connection we once had, to remember why we fell in love in the first place. Marcus showed up 3 hours late. "Sorry, love," he tossed out, loosening his tie and not even glancing at me. David, his business partner, and I got caught up with the quarterly projections. You know how time flies when you're discussing expansion strategies. And there I stood in the middle of our huge living room. I was wearing a dress that was meant to wow him, my makeup was flawless, but I could feel the last drop of hope slowly and painfully evaporating from my soul. "Marcus," my voice came out quieter than I expected, "it's our anniversary." For a second, he froze, and that, caught in the act, look flickered in his eyes, but it was immediately replaced by his usual, smooth smile. "Right." It completely slipped my mind. "Let me just take a quick shower, and we'll order delivery from that Asian restaurant you like." Delivery. For our second anniversary. I stood there in my most alluring outfit, feeling like the most expensive and foolish woman in the world. It was that very evening that I decided to do something that changed absolutely everything. While Marcus was in the bathroom, claiming he needed to wash off the stress of the day, as if stress could be simply sent down the drain with expensive shower gel, I picked up his phone, which he'd left on the nightstand. I know perfectly well that checking someone's phone is a low blow. But I was in a desperate situation, I was literally suffocating in this marriage, and I needed answers. His messenger chats were surprisingly clean. Business discussions with David, schedule coordination with his assistant, endless and boring corporate routine. No secret mistresses. No ambiguous messages from unknown women. To be honest, his digital life was just as lifeless and sterile as our relationship. How telling. But something still bothered me. The communication style between Marcus and David in the messages was different. There was an ease to it, something Marcus never showed with me. They had their inside jokes, references only they understood, and such an easy connection that I truly envied. From the outside, it looked like two people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company, a concept that had become completely foreign in my own marriage. You know the saying about not opening Pandora's box? Well, in my case, I was ready not just to peek inside but to pull out every last secret. And I was sure that I would not only survive it but also be able to tell my story. Take David, for example. Marcus's business partner, his best friend since their student days, and a person who, it seemed to me, knew my husband's schedule better than I did. They had been roommates at Yale and founded their investment firm almost immediately after graduation. And so it was that David was constantly around. He was always invited to our dinners, he joined us for holidays, he was that third wheel who, truthfully, never felt like one. If anything, I felt like the extra one in their perfectly synchronized duo. I started to notice details that had previously escaped my attention, as I was too absorbed in playing the role of the perfect wife. For instance, how drastically Marcus's behavior changed the moment David entered the room. My husband would immediately liven up, start laughing genuinely, and seem more enthusiastic than I had seen him in months. Or how close they stood to each other while discussing work matters. Their dialogues flowed so easily and naturally that I felt like a stranger in my own home. David will be with us for Thanksgiving, Marcus announced one November evening. It wasn't a suggestion, but a statement of fact, as if he were dictating a work schedule to me. Of course, he will, I replied, not even trying to hide the sarcasm in my voice. What holiday would be complete without David? Maybe I should have set a place for him at our anniversary. Oh, wait. We don't have anniversaries anymore. Marcus gave me a cold, sharp look. He's family, Evelyn. You know he has nowhere else to go. Family. What an interesting choice of words. Especially considering David actually had parents in Arizona and a brother living in Austin. But apparently, it was decreed that he should celebrate all important dates at our table. I increasingly caught myself feeling like an outsider at my own holidays. It's a rather strange feeling, especially when you're the one responsible for buying the turkey. But instead of getting into another pointless argument that would lead nowhere, I decided to change tactics and just observe. At the Christmas table, I watched them both with such intense focus, as if my entire future depended on it. Those fleeting glances they exchanged. The way David could make Marcus burst out laughing with just a raised eyebrow. The comfortable, easy silence that settled between them and spoke louder than any words. When David praised the dinner I had spent all day preparing, Marcus literally beamed with pride, as if it were his own personal achievement. It was almost funny. Have you ever watched a couple who obviously have feelings for each other but are trying desperately to pretend they're just friends? It's like watching a very bad stage play where the actors have completely forgotten their lines but are desperately trying to keep acting. Shortly after the holidays, I stumbled upon a discovery that literally split my life in two. Marcus forgot to lock the safe in his home office, something that had never happened. My husband was obsessed with security, more so than a government vault. He kept all the important documents there, property deeds, investment reports, insurance policies. And, as it turned out, secrets capable of destroying my entire life. I knew perfectly well that I shouldn't be doing this. I knew I was violating every conceivable personal boundary. But, to be honest, my marriage was already in ruins. I vitally needed to understand why I was living with a man who had become a complete stranger to me. For the most part, the contents were exactly what you'd expect: stacks of legal documents, financial summaries, work contracts. But then, wedged between the property deeds and his life insurance policy, like some cruel, belated joke, I found a thick envelope. It had the logo of a medical facility on it. The letterhead read, Chicago Center for Male Reproductology. But the scariest part was the date. This document was dated 2 years before we met. 2 years before he charmed me with stories of our future together. long before he started nodding sympathetically every time I brought up my desire for children. My hands were literally shaking as I unfolded the form, and frankly, they had every reason to. Report on vasectomy procedure. Voluntary sterilization procedure successful. Patient notified of the permanent nature of the operation. Can you imagine? My own husband had let me believe for years that the problem was me, that I was defective, while he himself had long ago consciously ensured that we would never have children. That level of duplicity was almost astonishing. The envelope fell from my weakened fingers like irrefutable evidence. For a few seconds, I just stood frozen in Marcus's office, staring at that document lying on his polished wooden desk. 2 years before we met. 2 years before he charmed me with promises of a shared future. 2 years before he let me blame myself and my body for us not having a family. All our conversations about children had been pure theater, worthy of a top award. Every time I excitedly showed him baby clothes or discussed names, he was just playing along. This man had built our marriage on a foundation of such colossal deceit that even the most seasoned schemers could learn from him. My fingers were still trembling from a mix of anger and shock, but I managed to take clear photos of the document on my phone. Then I carefully placed everything back in the safe, exactly as it had been. If Marcus thought he was the only one playing the long game, he was in for a very, very big disappointment. The days following my discovery in the office turned into a surreal, elaborate nightmare. It wasn't just torture, it was existing in two realities at once. Outwardly, I was the same Evelyn. I sat at our massive dark wood dining table, mechanically nodding and asking Marcus about his meetings. How did the deal with the investors go? I'd ask, my voice sounding frighteningly even. I even managed to smile in the right places. But inside, a hurricane of rage and disgust was raging so fiercely that it felt like I was about to explode right at the dinner table. Every word he said, every move he made, the way he lifted the fork to his mouth, all of it resonated within me as a dull, throbbing pain. I watched him laugh casually while discussing his latest financial victories with David over a video call. And now, their inseparable, almost brotherly bond, which I had previously naively dismissed as a strong male friendship from college, took on a completely new, sinister meaning. Every shared chuckle sounded like a conspiracy to me. I was consumed by one single, all-encompassing question: does David know? Did he know about the operation? Was he a full participant in this disgusting, multi-year performance? The answer came instantly and left no doubt. Of course, he did. It's impossible to be that close, to go through Yale together, build a multi-million-dollar empire from scratch, be on each other's speed dial 24/7, and not know about such a fundamental decision. They weren't just friends, they were a single, well-oiled machine. And David absolutely knew that this machine was systematically crippling my life while I sat next to them, smiling falsely at them both. "You're a bit quiet today, Evelyn," Marcus tossed out one evening, his indifferent, fleeting gaze sliding over me before he buried his nose in his tablet again. He didn't even look up from the stock market reports, continuing to play this cheap parody of a caring husband. "Just tired from the day," I lied, and my voice sounded as lifeless as our relationship. I was internally amazed. Was he really so immersed in his own world of lies that he couldn't feel the ice cracking beneath his feet? But then, why was I surprised? Marcus had always been a virtuoso of selective vision. He masterfully ignored everything that didn't fit into his perfect, glossy picture of the world. It was, undoubtedly, a very convenient talent when your entire life is one continuous, carefully planned deception. The final, crushing blow to my illusions was delivered during another business dinner we were hosting for Marcus's investors. As usual, I was flawlessly playing the role of the perfect hostess, making sure everyone had drinks and maintaining light conversation. And it was at that moment that I saw something that literally made my blood run cold. Marcus and David were standing by the fireplace. David reached out and adjusted Marcus's tie. It was an intimate, almost spousal gesture that lasted just a fraction of a second longer than is permissible for just friends. But it wasn't even the gesture itself. It was the way they looked at each other in that moment. There was no business in that look, no friendship. In it was a deep, long-standing, romantic affection. It was the very look he had never given me. I mumbled an excuse and, nearly knocking over a waiter, hurried into the kitchen. I gripped the cold marble countertop so tightly my knuckles turned white, just trying to stay on my feet and catch my breath. How long? How many years had this been going on? Did it start back at Yale, among the books and college parties? Or did it develop later, in the quiet of their offices, while they were building their multi-million-dollar empire? And the main, most agonizing question, why did Marcus marry me at all, if his heart belonged to someone else? The answer was as cold and sterile as that form from the envelope in his safe. Everything fell into place. The vasectomy, performed long before we met. The marriage to a woman who desperately, painfully wanted children. The 100-page prenuptial agreement that I, blinded by love and the sparkle of diamonds, had signed almost without looking. This wasn't a marriage. It was a diabolically clever plan. Marcus married me because I was the perfect cover. A beautiful, respectable wife from a good family, someone he could show off in public while he quietly lived his real life with David. And when the time came, our childless marriage would inevitably fracture. After all, no matter how hard I tried, I wouldn't be able to give him an heir. And then, playing the tragedy of the unhappy husband whose dreams of a family were shattered by his wife's inadequacy, he could calmly file for divorce, keeping every cent of his fortune. It was brilliant. In the most disgusting, sociopathic sense of the word. I almost admired the long con. Almost. I dove headfirst into gathering information, acting as if my life depended on it, which, in essence, was the absolute truth. This was no longer just amateur fact-checking and guesswork, like in a cheap TV show. I turned to a professional, a private investigator, a woman named Jessica Riley. She specialized in delicate family matters, and her reputation suggested she had seen absolutely every possible scenario of infidelity. I paid for her services from an account that Marcus didn't even know existed. It was a small savings left to me by my grandmother, which I had prudently kept separate from our joint finances. It turned out my self-preservation instinct was far more developed than I could have imagined. "I need proof that my husband is having an affair," I said clearly to Jessica during our first meeting. We sat in a nondescript cafe in the Bronx, as far as possible from the financial district where Marcus or David might spot us. Jessica was in her 40s, with a sharp, perceptive gaze and a professional composure that I could only have dreamed of 4 years ago when this all began. "Often, spouses have a gut feeling long before the facts emerge," she said, studying me intently across the narrow table. "What is your intuition telling you?" "It's telling me that my entire married life has been a farce from the very beginning. And I intend to get proof of that." She nodded, as if she had heard similar confessions hundreds of times. It was both reassuring and incredibly sad. "I need 3 weeks. If there's anything to dig up, I'll dig it up." Those 2 weeks felt like an eternity. I was forced to continue playing the role of the devoted, loving wife, while my brain worked around the clock on my liberation strategy. Marcus, of course, noticed absolutely nothing. His blindness was the best proof of how little attention he had ever paid to his real wife, preferring that perfect, but fake, image he had invented for himself. "Don't you think Evelyn has been acting strange lately?" I heard David's voice say to Marcus one evening. They were sitting in the living room and obviously thought I was upstairs and couldn't hear them. Of course. My husband thought it was normal to discuss my mental state with his partner, but not with me. "It's probably just hormones," Marcus dismissed casually. "You know how women get. Hormones." After 4 years of marriage, that was his entire deep, clinical analysis of my condition. Not a shadow of concern that his wife might be deeply unhappy. Not a single thought that something in our life was fundamentally broken. Just hormones. As if I were some unpredictable weather phenomenon, an element that sometimes causes storms. In that moment, I desperately wanted to burst into the room and show them both, in all its glory, what a hormonal woman was capable of. But I forced myself to hold back. My patience was about to pay off, and the finale of this story would be something they couldn't even imagine. The call from Jessica came on Thursday morning. Marcus was on his usual morning run with David, a daily ritual I used to take for granted. Now, this 2-hour, health-conscious activity looked like the perfect alibi for everything they were hiding. "We need to meet," her voice on the phone was brief and professional. "I've got what you asked for." The pictures she laid out in front of me at the same cafe in the Bronx left no room for doubt. Here were Marcus and David leaving a discreet boutique hotel in Soho, clearly not the place for business negotiations, unless those negotiations involved a king-size bed and room service. Here they were in the dim light of a restaurant in Greenwich Village, holding hands across the table with the kind of tenderness only couples in love display. And here, a night shot, Marcus and David kissing at the entrance to David's apartment building. This was taken on the very evening my husband had supposedly stayed late at the office, working on an urgent report. "How long has this been going on?" was all I could breathe, looking at this scatter of photos that, like marked cards in a cheater's game, revealed the entire hidden life of my husband. Based on my data, this relationship goes back at least to their Yale days, possibly earlier, Jessica replied calmly. "They are extremely cautious, almost paranoid. But there's a system. Hotel rooms are always booked under David's name. Restaurant reservations, too, and always at quiet places where they won't run into anyone from their business circles. Your husband has been playing a double game for a very, very long time." As I processed this information, I oddly felt not panic, but an icy, almost unnatural calm. The picture of betrayal was complete. There was no longer a single doubt. I no longer needed to question my own instincts or try to silence my inner voice. There was no need to find excuses for his actions, which had always seemed so illogical. Marcus had used his marriage to me solely as a cover for his real relationship with David. He had preemptively arranged for sterilization to ensure I could never get pregnant. He had built a perfect, cunning trap so that when this marriage fell apart, I would be left with nothing. Except he made one single, fatal miscalculation. He had catastrophically underestimated his wife. "I'm filing for divorce," I announced that same Thursday evening. I stood right in the doorway of his office while he, as usual, was scrolling through some quarterly reports. I had replayed this scene in my head for weeks, but in reality, my voice sounded even firmer and clearer than I had expected. At first, Marcus didn't even look up from his laptop. And why would he? I was, after all, just his wife. "Don't be dramatic, Evelyn. Whatever is going on with you, we can discuss it calmly, like adults. There's nothing left to discuss. I'm getting out of this marriage." That finally made him look up. He slowly raised his eyes to mine. I managed to catch the cold calculation flash in his gaze for a split second before his face instantly froze. It took on that very expression I had learned to recognize infallibly over the years. This was his negotiation face, the one he put on when dealing with difficult clients who hadn't yet realized how lucky they were to be dealing with him. "Evelyn, let's not be hasty. Marriage is work," he began his rehearsed speech. "Work?" I laughed, and it sounded cold. "When was the last time you looked at me as a wife, and not as a piece of furniture?" He walked around the desk, his mask of the caring husband starting to crack. "You're being emotional. I've filed the papers. They'll be served tomorrow." That's when his face changed. All the fake concern vanished, leaving only cold calculation. The real Marcus. "Perhaps you should reconsider, Evelyn," he hissed. "Remember our prenup? You signed away almost everything when you were so desperate to become Mrs. Blackwell. There it was. The threat. He was sure I was trapped and would be left with nothing." "I remember," I replied calmly. "I also remember the clause about voiding the contract due to fraud." His confidence wavered. "I don't know what you're. I know about David." Those words hung in the silence of the office like a live electrical wire, sparking with menace. Marcus's face instantly became completely unreadable. This was his poker face, the one he wore during tough negotiations, calculating his next move. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Of course you don't," I shot back. I turned to leave but paused in the doorway for the final line. "Oh, and Marcus. I suggest you contact your lawyers immediately. You're going to need the best and most expensive team you can find. Trust me. The ensuing divorce battle was exactly as brutal as I'd anticipated. Marcus didn't skimp and hired the most elite law firm in the city, those sharks in $5,000 suits whose main specialty is protecting wealthy husbands from any claims by their problematic wives. They immediately flooded the court with paperwork, filing one motion after another. They questioned my emotional stability, disputed any financial contribution I'd made to our life, and generally painted me as an incompetent spouse. However, these high-paid professionals made one critical miscalculation. They mistakenly believed they were dealing with the same naive, love-blind girl who had signed that prenup without a second glance 4 years ago. The first preliminary hearing was scheduled for Tuesday morning at the family court building. I arrived early. I wore a severe navy blue suit that broadcast professionalism and absolute confidence. Despite Marcus's lawyers insisting on a completely closed proceeding, the press had somehow gotten wind of the hearing. Blackwell Investment Group was too prominent a figure in financial circles, and scandalous high society divorces are always a juicy story for reporters. Marcus arrived at court with his army of lawyers. David, naturally, was at his side as moral support. They huddled together, whispering confidently and shooting victorious glances my way. I sat with my attorney, Elizabeth Reed. Her specialty was exactly these kinds of seemingly hopeless cases against moneybags, and she had an impeccable reputation. "Ready?" she asked quietly. I touched my purse, feeling the envelope inside. I've been ready for this for months. The show began. Marcus's lawyer painted a heart-wrenching portrait of his client, a devoted husband whose wife had become emotionally unstable. The climax was our prenup. With a theatrical gesture, they pointed the court to the clause that disinherited me due to my inability to give my husband an heir. Mrs. Blackwell was unable to fulfill this key aspect of the agreement, the lawyer boomed. The entire courtroom stared at me, evaluating what was wrong with me. It was a brilliant performance. For a second, I almost believed I was defective myself. But at that moment, Marcus's lawyer made a fatal mistake. He looked directly at me with such a smug smirk that clearly said, "Checkmate." "Furthermore, Your Honor," he continued, "medical experts will prove that Mrs. Blackwell is, in fact, barren. My client lived with false hope for 4 years while his wife concealed her condition, making conception fundamentally impossible." That was the bait I had been waiting for. "Your Honor," I said, rising to my feet. My voice rang out loud and clear in the deafening silence. I caught my lawyer, Elizabeth, look up in surprise out of the corner of my eye. "I have evidence that I would like to submit to the court immediately." I stepped forward. The click of my heels on the marble floor echoed in the hall like a ticking bomb. I walked straight to the judge's bench and placed that same, almost familiar, thick envelope in front of him. Judge Thompson gave me a long look, then took it. There was absolute silence in the courtroom, broken only by the rustle of paper as he unfolded the documents. First, he read the vasectomy report, performed on Marcus 2 years before our wedding. Then, he moved to the stack of photos from the private investigator. Here were Marcus and David entering the hotel, here they were kissing. Next came the bank statements, confirming payments for hotel rooms and restaurant bills from their secret dates. And finally, the phone records, documenting their hours-long nightly conversations during the times Marcus was supposedly stuck at the office. The silence in the hall went from tense to deafening. You could have heard a pin drop. I watched Marcus's face. His color changed from a confident pink to a sickly pale. All his vaunted composure evaporated in 30 seconds. Not bad for a man who was used to controlling every situation. Judge Thompson's expression grew sterner as he reviewed page after page. Finally, he looked up. His gaze slowly moved from Marcus to David, and then to me, as if he were a spectator at a very expensive and dramatic play. "Mr. Blackwell," he said, his voice carrying the full weight of judicial authority and barely concealed disgust, "do you have any explanation for these documents?" Marcus's lawyer shot up so fast it looked like his chair had caught fire. "Your Honor," we were not prepared to comment on these allegations today. We move for a continuance so that we may properly review the materials and prepare our response. Allegations? Judge Thompson's eyebrows shot up. He held up one of the photographs for all to see. Here, your client appears to be kissing another man at the entrance to an apartment building. Are you claiming this photo is a fake? I was watching in real time as Marcus's carefully constructed world crumbled like a house of cards. And, truthfully, I probably should have felt at least a twinge of shame for the immense, all-consuming satisfaction I was feeling. But after 4 years of being systematically made to believe that I was the problem, that I was broken and inadequate, watching his outright panic felt like pure justice, served with a generous helping of karma. David had turned completely white and was staring at his hands, as if they had suddenly become the most interesting thing in the world. The man who had so confidently and comfortably played the role of the concerned business partner suddenly developed a keen interest in the floor pattern of the courtroom. Your Honor, Elizabeth, my lawyer, rose gracefully. These documents irrefutably prove that Mr. Blackwell led a double life throughout his entire marriage to my client. And the vasectomy report proves he never intended to have children. This makes all his claims about my client's supposed infertility not just a lie, but deliberate and malicious fraud. Judge Thompson flipped through the photos, his face growing grimmer. This court has seen a lot, he finally said, but this level of cynical calculation, this is extraordinary. It appears Mr. Blackwell knowingly married Mrs. Blackwell to cover up his real relationship. He glanced at the papers. With Mr. David. And then drafted a prenuptial agreement to punish her for an infertility that he himself had arranged. Marcus finally found his voice, which sounded more like a weak croak. Your Honor, my relationship with David is strictly business. Judge Thompson cut him off with an icy tone. Mr. Blackwell, I would strongly advise you not to lie under oath in my courtroom. I see the evidence, and I've been on this bench too long not to recognize deceit. At that moment, the press section erupted. Reporters were scribbling as if their lives depended on it. I could already see the next day's headlines, The Secret Life of Tycoon Blackwell. His entire immaculate reputation, which he had built over years, was turning to dust right before my eyes. And I had the best seat in the house. In light of this flagrant deception, the judge continued, I rule that the marital contract is null and void on the grounds of fraud. Mrs. Blackwell was intentionally misled. She signed an agreement believing she was marrying a man who wanted a family, when in fact, he had long since ensured that family would never happen. Marcus's lawyer looked like the ground had been pulled out from under him. He mumbled something, Your Honor, we must ask. Furthermore, Judge Thompson's voice cut through the silence, I am awarding Mrs. Blackwell exactly half of all marital assets. This includes their primary residence, their country home, and a significant stake in the Blackwell Investment Group. 50%. Of everything. Including the very penthouse where I had felt like a mere decoration for 3 years. Including our home in Aspen, where I had organized countless receptions for his friends and partners. And, most importantly, a controlling share in the company that Marcus and David considered their life's greatest achievement. Marcus shot up from his seat as if he'd been electrocuted. Your Honor, you can't. That company is all I have. A company you developed while legally married, Judge Thompson snapped, his tone icy. Your wife had every right to know the truth about your intentions and your actual medical status. Instead, you perpetrated a fraud of such a magnitude that it simply boggles the mind of this court. I could literally see the numbers of his bank account dimming in Marcus's eyes. The man who considered himself a brilliant strategist, who had planned every move, had just lost everything. All because he deemed the woman he chose as his cover too insignificant. There was something incredibly just about that. The fallout from this decision was immediate and devastating. Before 2 days had passed, the news of Marcus's scam had spread through Chicago's financial district like wildfire. This scandal had everything the local high society loves, a secret affair, cynical deceit, and the loud, humiliating fall of an influential tycoon. Marcus's business partners immediately began to distance themselves. In a world where reputation is worth more than money, no one wanted to be associated with a man caught in such a dirty fraud. His calls suddenly stopped going through, scheduled meetings were cancelled one after another. Overnight, Marcus Blackwell became an outcast in the very world where just yesterday he had considered himself king. David suffered no less professional loss. Their investors, already agitated by the scandal, began to rapidly pull their assets as soon as they realized the two company founders had been living a lie that put any TV drama to shame. The man who had helped build Blackwell Investment Group from scratch instantly became a toxic partner due to his direct involvement in the deception. I returned to the penthouse while Marcus was packing his things. He resembled a defeated general, sullenly retreating from the battlefield. The irony of the scene was simply delicious. The woman he had so cynically tried to leave with nothing was now becoming the mistress of his home. I was staying here, surrounded by all this ostentatious luxury, art, and expensive furniture that he loved to use to impress people who now wouldn't even answer his calls. "This isn't over, Evelyn," he threw out on his last day. He stood in the middle of our, now formerly our, living room, surrounded by boxes like the ruins of his fallen empire. "You think you've won something? You have no idea how to run a business. You'll run all of this into the ground in less than a year." I sat in his favorite leather armchair, the very one where he used to review his financial reports, completely ignoring me. "You know what's funny, Marcus?" I said calmly. "For 4 years, you treated me like I was too stupid to notice your lies. Too weak to fight back. Too dependent on you and your money to survive on my own. And yet, here we are. I'm in this chair, and you're at the exit with your boxes." As soon as Marcus left, the penthouse transformed. It felt more spacious, lighter, as if all the suffocating, heavy air of his presence had finally been pumped out of the rooms. I walked through those halls, which had always reminded me of a cold, lifeless museum, and for the first time, began to turn them into my home. The first thing I did was get rid of his entire vaunted, contemporary art collection. Every pretentious, gaudy piece he had bought solely to show off to guests was immediately packed up and donated to the Art Institute of Chicago. Let the museum curators deal with his great legacy now. I was too busy building my own. Elizabeth Reed, my lawyer, became my chief advisor during this transition. I dove into the complex process of taking control of the Blackwell Investment Group. The firm, like a sinking ship, was rapidly losing clients and money. But its foundation, its core, was still strong. Marcus and David had indeed created something valuable, even if they had nearly drowned it all in their filthy personal drama. "You have two paths, Evelyn," Elizabeth explained to me during one of our evening strategy sessions. "You can just sell your stake, take the money, which is enough to buy a small island, and forget about everything. Or, you can stay, join the fight, rebuild the company's reputation, and in the long run, possibly earn many times more." It took me about 30 seconds to think. "I didn't go through all this hell just to choose the easy way out now," I replied. "What's more, I want to prove to everyone, and especially to myself, that this company can thrive without them." The very first board of directors meeting I attended as the primary shareholder became legendary. All those important men in expensive suits, who were used to seeing me as just a beautiful accessory to Marcus, were suddenly forced to take me seriously. They had to realize that I was their boss now. The adjustment period was painful. Mostly for them. Trying to save Blackwell Investment Group was like resuscitating a patient in critical condition. Every single day was filled with new crises. Existing clients threatened to terminate their contracts. Our own team was demoralized and didn't know what to expect tomorrow. And competitors were already circling us like predators, ready to tear into our assets at the first sign of weakness. But I had an ace up my sleeve that Marcus never had. I knew how to listen to people, a skill he had always considered useless. While he was obsessed exclusively with the numbers and reports, I had spent years honing the ability to understand relationships, catch hidden dynamics, and understand people's true motives, not just their words. As it turned out, in big business, this soft power proved to be an incredibly valuable weapon. My very first strategic move was a complete rebrand. Blackwell Investment Group ceased to exist. In its place, Apex Financial Solutions was born, a new name, a clean slate, untainted by Marcus's scandalous past. I immediately brought in the best crisis management specialists and a new marketing team. And, most importantly, I found a new CEO. Her name was Rachel Vance. Rachel had everything I lacked: an iron grip on finances, 15 years of asset management experience, and a brilliant reputation as a specialist in reviving companies on the brink of collapse. Furthermore, she was a woman in this thoroughly male-dominated world and knew perfectly well what it was like to be constantly underestimated. "Why me?" she asked directly at our first meeting. "You could find dozens of top managers with big names who would probably cost you less. Because you know from your own experience what it's like when men in expensive suits don't take you seriously," I replied. "And because, after studying your resume, I realized, you are exactly the type of leader Marcus Blackwell would have fired in a panic on day one. And that makes you the ideal candidate to build the company I want to see." Rachel thought for a second, then smiled. "So, you want to prove the firm can survive without him?" I shook my head. "I want to prove that without him, it will thrive." The first 4 months at Apex Financial Solutions were hell. Just as Marcus predicted, I nearly failed. We lost almost 35% of our clients and had to downsize significantly. There were days when I seriously thought he had been right about me. But we endured. We bet on something Marcus never had: absolute and complete transparency. We turned the scandal into our greatest strength. As it turned out, many investors liked the idea of putting money into a company literally reborn from the ashes of deception. And it worked. About 6 months after the court case, I received an unexpected call at the office. It was David. He mumbled something of an apology, said he never wanted me to get hurt. "But you knew I would," I interrupted him calmly, setting down my pen. "You knew about the operation. You knew I was just a cover. You were a silent accomplice in all of it." His only pathetic excuse was, "I love him." "I know," I replied. "But love can't be an excuse for such calculated cruelty. You both knew exactly what you were doing." He was silent for a moment, then said, "You know, Marcus always underestimated you terribly. He only saw in you what was convenient for him to see." "Yes," I agreed. "And that was his fatal mistake." 2 years passed. Apex Financial Solutions wasn't just surviving, we were thriving. Our portfolio had tripled, we opened new branches in Los Angeles and Austin, and Rachel, my CEO, appeared on the cover of Financial Weekly. But my real, sweet triumph came on an ordinary Monday. My assistant informed me I had a visitor, a Mr. Michael. He turned out to be the husband of Jessica, my private investigator. Unlike his wife, Michael was a corporate vulture, a specialist in acquiring troubled, sinking companies. He sat down across from me and, with a satisfied smile, slid a thin folder across the desk. "I think you'll find this extremely interesting, Mrs. Blackwell. The remnants of a Blackwell investment group have just been put up for an emergency sale." I opened the folder, and a predatory smile spread across my face. Marcus and David's company, that very Blackwell investment group, was up for urgent sale. After the scandal, it had become a sinking ship and was now desperately seeking a buyer. The price? Only $10 million, peanuts compared to what it was worth at its peak. "It's a good deal," Michael remarked, "for someone who knows how to launder a tainted brand. $12 million was just pocket change for me. But this was a chance to own what Marcus considered his life's work. And the cherry on top," Michael added with a grin, "they don't know the buyer is you. The deal is going through a shell company." The thought of Marcus's face the moment he found out the truth was almost too sweet. The acquisition went perfectly smoothly. His company officially became a subsidiary of my Apex Financial Solutions. It was that feeling of closure I had been waiting for so long. The same day the papers were signed, he called. I was sitting in my new office, looking out at the Chicago skyline. His name flashed on the screen. Curiosity won, and I answered. "Evelyn." His voice was empty, devoid of all its former arrogance. I found out who bought the company. I paused for a beat, then answered him in the most polite, businesslike tone I could muster. Congratulations on closing the deal, Marcus. I heard you were offered a fair price. Considering the circumstances and the firm's current reputation. Why? His voice was strained and full of desperation. You already got almost everything. Why did you need this too? I didn't take anything from you, Marcus, I replied, leaning back calmly in my chair. I felt completely confident. I simply acquired what was rightfully mine. This company was built while we were married. I was legally entitled to half. Now I own it completely, and it's all legal. You have no idea what it meant to me, he exclaimed emotionally. Oh, I have a very good idea. It was your main goal, your achievement. Just like our marriage was supposed to be my achievement. The only difference is, you built yours on dishonesty. And I will rebuild this, but on principles of transparency. He was silent for a long time. Finally, he asked, and what are you going to do with it? I'm going to turn it into a company that doesn't need to deceive people to succeed. The process of merging Blackwell Investment Group with my Apex Financial Solutions was a complex task that took 6 months. We conducted a thorough reorganization. We kept the most valuable employees, the best client accounts, and the working strategies that had brought the firm's success in the first place. And everything else, all that toxic work culture, the system of favoritism and bias that had allowed such a situation to happen, we completely eliminated. But the real surprise came when I learned just how deep Marcus had sunk. The man who once managed millions was now on the verge of bankruptcy. His reputation in the financial world was completely destroyed. David turned out to be more agile. He had cut all ties with Marcus as soon as the scandal broke, moved to California, and was slowly starting to rebuild his career. As for me, I was living in the very penthouse that was no longer my prison, and running a company that was bringing in more than Marcus could have ever imagined. And I could finally breathe. But the story doesn't end just there. At a charity gala, the kind I used to attend as Marcus's trophy, I met Dr. Stephen Allen. He was a neurosurgeon, had recently gone through a divorce himself, and was completely unimpressed by either my status or my success. So, you're the woman who crushed Blackwell Investment, he asked when we were introduced, more with curiosity than judgment. I'm the woman who survived it, I corrected him. It's not the same thing. He looked at me with his intelligent gray eyes. I can imagine. That must have taken incredible strength. And that was the first time someone saw not my financial victory, but what I had to go through. Most people only saw the penthouse and the successful company. He was the first one who understood that surviving that kind of betrayal required more than just good lawyers. Would you like to have dinner sometime? He asked as the evening was winding down. Somewhere quiet, where we don't have to shout over the crowd. I almost refused. After Marcus, the very thought of trusting someone again seemed insane. But James was different. There was an authenticity to him that Marcus had never possessed. I should warn you, I decided. I come with a very complicated history. A public scandal, serious trust issues, and an ex-husband who built our marriage on a lie. James smiled. And this smile was real, warm, not the rehearsed one I had seen for years. Well, my baggage includes 12-hour emergency surgeries, a reputation as a workaholic, and an ex-wife who is convinced I chose my career over our family. I propose we compare our baggage over dinner on Friday. I caught myself smiling back. For the first time in a long time, genuinely. Sounds perfect. 8 months later, I was standing in the bathroom of my penthouse, looking at 2 clear pink lines on a test. The emotions I felt were impossible to describe. After everything Marcus had put me through. The years I believed I was broken, the public humiliation, the cruel irony of fate, and now, I was pregnant. Stephen and I hadn't rushed things, building the real trust that I never had. He was patient and understood my need for independence. We had talked about kids at some point in the future, but apparently, the future had arrived much sooner. Evelyn, his voice called from the bedroom. Are you all right? I walked out of the bathroom, still clutching the test. Stephen looked at my face, then at the test, and his concerned expression turned to shock. He stayed silent, giving me the chance to voice my feelings first. "I'm pregnant," I breathed, and the words sounded so unreal. After all of Marcus's lies about my infertility, after everything I believed. "I'm actually pregnant." He was by my side in an instant, hugging me tightly, but very gently. "What are you feeling?" he asked quietly. "I'm terrified," I admitted honestly. "And thrilled. And I feel this incredible sense of vindication, like the universe has a very specific sense of humor." Stephen proposed when I was 8 months pregnant. It wasn't the ostentatious show with a huge diamond that Marcus would have put on. It was quiet and real. He offered me a simple gold ring that had belonged to his grandmother and promised to spend the rest of his life proving that I hadn't been wrong to trust him. We had a small, intimate ceremony right in the rooftop garden of the penthouse. We were surrounded only by those who had truly supported me through the darkest times. As for Marcus and David, they were, of course, not on the guest list. I heard rumors that they eventually moved to Seattle. David supposedly opened some tiny consulting firm there, and the once mighty Marcus Blackwell was now working as a mid-level analyst. They were together, finally out in the open, but their brilliant careers and reputations were destroyed forever. They say the best revenge is living well. Well, my life was turning out just fine. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. You'll find even more stories here about how people manage to turn the worst betrayals into their greatest victories. And remember, sometimes those who underestimate us so severely are actually giving us the most valuable gift, incredible motivation to prove just how wrong they were.